The Arctic morning broke with rare mercy, offering a brief window through storms that had raged for days. Visibility cleared just enough for the rescue helicopter to navigate toward the silent research station. The pilot, Captain Elena Novak, had attempted this approach 3 times in the past week without success. "We've got a break in the weather," she radioed back to Churchill Base, making final approach to Outpost Perseverance now. From above, the station appeared unervingly still, half buried under drifting snow. No smoke rose from the emergency exhaust pipes. No figures moved in the observation deck where researchers typically monitored weather patterns. Search and rescue specialist James Wong peered through binoculars, his breath creating small clouds inside the helicopter cabin. "No visible movement, but the main entrance appears compromised," he reported, noting the partially open door swinging gently in the wind. The team had prepared for the worst after 23 days of radio silence from the climate research outpost. Weather monitoring stations across the Arctic relied on Perseverance's data, and when communications failed during peak research season, concern had quickly escalated to alarm. Captain Novak set the helicopter down 50 meters from the main entrance, the rotors whipping snow into blinding curtains. The 4-person rescue team moved with practiced efficiency, medical kits and emergency supplies distributed among them. Constable Sarah Bear led the approach, her bright orange parka stark against the endless white. As tribal liaison with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, she had insisted on joining this mission after learning 2 Indigenous researchers were stationed at Perseverance. "We document everything exactly as we find it," she reminded the team through her headset. The scene that greeted them defied expectations in the cruelest way possible. Instead of an abandoned station claimed by Arctic elements, they found evidence of human struggle frozen in time. The main entrance stood partially ajar, its frame damaged from the inside, blood frozen mid-drip in the sub-zero temperatures. The generator housing nearby showed signs of tampering, its access panel removed and discarded in the snow. Before the team could enter, movement drew their attention. 3 figures emerged from the shadows of the doorway, staggering rather than walking. Dr. Lena Varga came first, gaunt but somehow commanding even in her diminished state. Her eyes remained alert despite her physical condition. Behind her stumbled Marcus Holt, his hands trembling violently, gaze darting between his fellow survivors and the rescue team. Rachel Niviak appeared last, barely upright, supported by the doorframe. The Indigenous Logistics Coordinator's frostbitten face was etched with something beyond physical suffering. "Too many doors," she mumbled through cracked lips. "Too many locks." Medic Tara Chun rushed forward, thermal blankets already unfurled. "They're alive," she called back. Inside, the outpost told a different story than mere abandonment or weather damage. The research station had been transformed by human desperation. Barricades constructed from furniture blocked access to the east wing, while emergency supplies lay scattered rather than deployed systematically. 6 more researchers should be here, Wong noted, consulting his manifest as they moved deeper into the facility. Dr. Samuel Ortiz, Dr. Anika Jansen, Trevor Phillips, Dr. Yusuf Ahmed, Maya Khatri, and Dr. Wei Chun. They found one answer in the main corridor. Dr. Samuel Ortiz lay face up on the floor, his body frozen solid where he had fallen. His eyes remained open, fixed in an expression of desperate flight rather than peaceful passing. "He was running from something," Constable Bear observed quietly. "Or someone." The rescue team searched methodically through accessible areas, documenting broken equipment and signs of conflict. Spilled rations crunched underfoot, mixed with shattered glass from instrument panels. A bitter kerosene smell permeated the air, suggesting improvised heating after systems failed. Most telling was what they didn't find: no activated distress beacon, no fired emergency flares, no log entries explaining the catastrophic breakdown of order. The station's communications array remained intact but deliberately powered down. Dr. Varga, wrapped in thermal blankets aboard the helicopter, watched the continuing search with hollow eyes. Marcus Holt refused to look back at the station at all. Rachel Niviak drifted in and out of coherence, her words forming fragments of a story no one yet understood. "On arrival, we expected evidence of a weather-related tragedy," Constable Bear would later report. What we found instead was the wreckage of trust and the aftermath of choices no training could have prepared them for. The helicopter lifted off as weather conditions began deteriorating again. Below, Outpost Perseverance diminished against the vast white landscape, its secrets temporarily preserved in ice and silence. The survivors huddled separately despite sharing the same small cabin space. 3 souls rescued, 1 body recovered, and 6 lives unaccounted for. With each passing kilometer toward Churchill, the gap between their stories widened into chasms. "Tell me what happened," Constable Bear asked, her recorder capturing the first official testimony. "Start from the beginning." 3 survivors looked back at her, and 3 different stories began to unfold. The medical ward in Churchill's Northern Research Center hummed with quiet urgency. Nurses moved efficiently between the 3 survivors, their footsteps softened by institutional carpeting. Dr. Lena Varga sat upright in her hospital bed. Despite her physical condition, she maintained a commanding presence. Her dark hair had been washed and neatly combed back from a face marked by exhaustion but not defeat. "I need to make something absolutely clear," she told Constable Bear. "What happened at Perseverance was sabotage, not an accident." Her voice carried the measured authority of someone accustomed to being believed. Lena described weeks of tension at the outpost, focusing particularly on Marcus Holt's resentment toward her leadership decisions. "He undermined me at every turn," she explained, her hands resting carefully folded on the thin hospital blanket. When the storms intensified and resources became limited, his behavior grew increasingly erratic. According to Lena, Marcus had deliberately cut the generator wires after she'd implemented stricter rationing protocols. She described finding him near the damaged equipment, tool in hand, moments before darkness enveloped the station. "He wanted chaos," she insisted, her composure briefly faltering. "He thought without power, without structure, he could take control." In a room down the hall, Marcus Holt presented a starkly different reality. His lanky frame seemed diminished against the hospital pillows, hands constantly fidgeting with his blanket edge. "I didn't want to cut those wires," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "They made me do it." His defensive posture softened only when speaking of the early days at the outpost. Marcus described Lena's leadership style as increasingly dictatorial as conditions worsened. "She played favorites with rations," he claimed, eyes darting toward the door as if expecting interruption. Those who questioned her got less food, worse assignments, colder sleeping quarters. When pressed about the sabotage generator, Marcus's nervous energy intensified. "I just wanted to live," he repeated, words tumbling out between shallow breaths. "You don't understand what it was like there." The most troubling testimony came from Rachel Niviuk. The logistics coordinator lay curled on her side, severe frostbite on her extremities requiring constant medical attention. Her consciousness drifted between clarity and confusion. "We locked the wrong people out," she whispered during a lucid moment. "We thought we were protecting ourselves." Rachel's fragmented recollections painted shadowy pictures of barricaded doors and desperate choices. Unlike her fellow survivors, she seemed haunted not by what had happened, but by what they had done. "They were the good ones," she murmured, tears freezing on her cheeks. "The strong ones, the sane ones." Medical staff reported Rachel repeatedly waking from nightmares, crying out about doors that shouldn't be opened. Her fingers sometimes mimicked turning keys or sliding bolts, even while heavily sedated. Dr. Elias O'Colick, the attending physician, consulted quietly with investigators in the corridor. "All 3 show signs of extreme physical stress consistent with hypothermia and malnutrition," he explained, reviewing charts on his tablet. "Psychologically, they present very differently," he continued, lowering his voice. "Dr. Varga exhibits control mechanisms typical of trauma survivors, while Mr. Holt shows acute anxiety responses." When asked about Rachel, the doctor's professional demeanor softened with concern. "Ms. Niviuk's condition is more complex," he admitted. "Her dissociative episodes suggest profound psychological trauma beyond what the others experienced." Forensic teams, meanwhile, had begun compiling physical evidence from the outpost. The generator wires showed clean cuts, not weather damage or accidental breakage. Marcus's fingerprints were indeed found on the cutting tool, seemingly confirming Lena's accusation. Yet other details undermined her carefully constructed narrative. The fingerprint pattern suggested the tool had been gripped from multiple angles, as if handled by someone struggling rather than deliberately cutting. Blood samples from the frozen entrance matched Dr. Samuel Ortiz, while analysis of the barricaded wing revealed multiple blood types on makeshift barriers. Someone had attempted to break through from the inside. The survivors agree on the basic sequence, Constable Bear noted in her preliminary report. After the generator failed, order collapsed quickly, yet even this timeline showed inconsistencies under scrutiny. Food supplies had been divided unevenly before the power failure, not after. Communication equipment had been manually disabled rather than failing with the generator. Bear closed her notebook, watching snow accumulate outside the hospital window. The truth lies somewhere between their words, she reflected quietly. Each survivor has shaped the story to protect themselves. What remained now was to test their claims against the silent testimony of the station itself, a process that would reveal far darker truths than any had admitted. The helicopter approached Outpost Perseverance for the second time that week, now carrying a team of investigators rather than rescuers. Snow had partially filled their previous tracks, nature already reclaiming the site of human tragedy. Constable Bear led 4 specialists equipped to document and analyze the abandoned research station. The brief weather window demanded efficiency, with forecasts predicting another storm system within hours. "Remember, we're looking for patterns," she reminded the team as they secured equipment against the wind. "Focus on inconsistencies between physical evidence and testimony." Inside, the outpost's temperature had stabilized at -32 degrees, preserving the scene in a frozen tableau. Frost-coated abandoned coffee mugs, personal items, and research equipment, creating a ghostly landscape of interrupted lives. Forensic technician Miguel Santos methodically photographed each room before evidence collection began. His careful movements revealed profound respect for the story these spaces needed to tell. The flash of his camera illuminated dark corners where secrets had festered during those final weeks. "The kitchen tells us something important," he noted, documenting empty cupboards and scattered wrappers. "Look at how thoroughly it was picked clean." Behind the dining area's wall panels, investigators discovered hidden food caches. Emergency rations had been secreted away in heating ducts, insulation spaces, and behind equipment panels. Each hiding place suggested paranoia rather than mere preparation. "This contradicts Lena's timeline," Bear observed, examining a protein bar wrapper wedged behind a vent. "Hoarding began before the generator failed, not after." Most revealing was a substantial cache discovered in Dr. Anika Jansen's private quarters. The missing researcher had apparently accumulated enough supplies to sustain one person for weeks, suggesting the breakdown of trust had progressed further than any survivor had admitted. Lena's accusations about Marcus's hoarding now appeared questionable, though his fingerprints on the severed generator wires remained damning evidence. The laboratory section yielded additional insights, with research journals revealing growing tensions among the team. "Look at these entry logs," electronics specialist Maya Desai called out, examining the station's partial backup system. Access to the main freezer samples was restricted 2 weeks before communications stopped. The most disturbing discoveries awaited in the common hall, where blood spatters told a story of violent confrontation. Analysis would later confirm the blood belonged to 3 different individuals, including the deceased Dr. Ortiz. Written in marker on a wall panel, 5 words captured the outpost's dissent. "Trust no one. They lie." The handwriting matched Dr. Yusuf Ahmed, one of the missing researchers. The message had been partially scrubbed away, then rewritten more boldly, suggesting a desperate attempt to communicate a warning. "Rachel spoke about locks," Bear reminded the team, moving toward the barricaded section of the station. "Let's see what they were trying to keep out or in." The barriers proved more substantial than initial reports suggested. Tables, storage crates, and even scientific equipment had been stacked against doors leading to the east wing. The construction showed methodical planning rather than panic-driven blockading. On the accessible side lay scattered bedding and torn notebooks, evidence of hasty relocations. On the other side, visible through a small observation window, investigators discovered deep scratch marks on steel doors where someone had desperately tried to break through. The question isn't just about survival anymore, Bear observed, carefully documenting the lab scene. Something else was happening here, something they were willing to die for or kill for. The most haunting evidence emerged from personal journals recovered from various quarters. Entries tracked deteriorating relationships, paranoid observations, and increasingly frantic notes about colleagues' behavior. One entry from Trevor Phillips, dated just 3 days before communications ceased, reads simply, "They're changing, not all at once, but enough to notice." As the investigators prepared to leave ahead of approaching weather, Bear surveyed the outpost one final time. The physical evidence had shattered the survivors' carefully constructed narratives, revealing deeper currents of fear and desperation. At this point, she would later report, the question was no longer if sabotage had occurred, but whether murder had followed. And if Rachel was right, they had made a fatal mistake in choosing who to lock out. The helicopter lifted off as the first snowflakes of the new storm began to fall, leaving Outpost Perseverance once again to the mercy of the Arctic silence. January 23rd emerged as the pivotal moment when Outpost Perseverance fractured beyond repair. The date appeared in all 3 survivors' accounts, yet the events they described seemed to belong to entirely different realities. Back in Churchill, investigators prepared separate interview rooms for detailed testimonies. The clinical spaces featured only simple tables, recording equipment, and windows looking out on endless snowfields. Dr. Lena Varga sat with perfect posture despite her still recovering body. Her account flowed with the coherence of someone who had mentally rehearsed each detail. According to Lena, the night began with Marcus gathering researchers in the common area while she worked late in the communications lab. "I heard raised voices," she recalled, her hands resting calmly on the table. "When I investigated, Marcus was rallying the others against my leadership." Her version described Marcus as the instigator who sabotaged the generator after weeks of building resentment. She claimed he struck Dr. Ortiz during the confrontation when the meteorologist attempted to restore order. "I had no choice but to organize barriers for our protection," she explained. Those who remained loyal helped secure the East Wing to prevent further violence. In the adjacent room, Marcus Holt's nervous energy contrasted sharply with Lena's composure. His fingers drummed constantly as he described a very different sequence of events. In his telling, Lena had orchestrated the generator sabotage herself to consolidate control. "She'd been rationing food unfairly for weeks," he insisted, voice cracking with emotion. "Creating divisions, turning us against each other." Marcus claimed Ortiz had confronted Lena about missing supplies, leading to a heated exchange. Samuel started questioning her decisions publicly, he recalled. Next day, he was dead in the corridor. His account painted Lena as manipulative rather than protective, suggesting the barricades were meant to isolate dissenters rather than shield allies. His own role in cutting the wires he described as coerced, performed under duress after threats to his safety. Rachel Niviak's testimony proved most challenging to obtain. Her recovery progressed more slowly, her mind still fragmented by trauma. When she spoke of January 23rd, her words emerged in disconnected bursts rather than narrative flow. "The lights went first," she whispered, gaze fixed on something beyond the interview room walls. "Then the trust." Unlike her fellow survivors, Rachel insisted the barricades weren't erected to keep Marcus out, but to keep someone else in. Her fragmentary account suggested a different motivation behind the outpost's division. "We locked the wrong ones out," she repeated, as she had since the rescue. "The strong ones, the sane ones." When pressed about who gave orders that night, Rachel's response chilled investigators. Everyone thought they were in charge. No one was. Medical examiners added crucial physical evidence to these contradicting accounts. Dr. Ortiz's corpse showed blunt trauma consistent with an axe handle, the same tool both Lena and Marcus admitted to wielding at different points during the confrontation. Fingerprint analysis on the weapon revealed both had handled it, along with at least one unidentified person whose prints didn't match any survivor or known staff member. This mysterious third participant remained unexplained in all testimonies. The station's partial backup logs showed multiple attempts to access secured areas that night, with authentication codes belonging to researchers who, according to survivor accounts, should have been incapacitated or barricaded elsewhere at those times. Constable Bear reviewed the assembled evidence with growing concern. Each account carried just enough plausibility to seem credible while contradicting the others. Physical evidence supported fragments of each version while undermining others. In ordinary cases, testimony guides us toward clarity, she noted in her case journal that evening. Here, it deepens the fog. The truth of January 23rd remained elusive, fractured across three perspectives like light through a broken prism. But as technicians continued processing evidence from the abandoned station, something beyond human testimony was about to speak. The investigation's turning point arrived in an unmarked evidence box from Outpost Perseverance. Technicians had recovered a charred but partially functional device from beneath debris in the communications center. The unassuming black metal case bore no obvious significance to untrained eyes. Dr. Ava Kim, digital forensics specialist, recognized it immediately. "It's an experimental equipment black box," she explained to Bear, "designed to monitor system performance during Arctic extremes." The device's significance lay in its independent battery backup, separate from the station's main power. While the outpost had gone dark after the generator sabotage, this silent witness had continued recording environmental data and ambient audio for several days afterward. "We might have actual documentation of what happened," Kim said, her voice carefully measured to contain rising hope. "If the memory cores survived the cold." The recovery team worked through the night in Churchill's secure lab. Damaged circuits were bypassed, corroded connections cleaned, and specialized software deployed to extract fragmented data. By morning, they had assembled nearly 6 hours of discontinuous audio spanning the critical period. Constable Bear gathered the investigation team for the first playback session. The room fell silent as the initial recording began with static, then resolved into recognizable voices echoing through Perseverance's corridors. The chaos captured was immediate and visceral. Multiple people shouted over each other in the darkness, panic evident in their elevated tones. "Keep the doors shut," a male voice demanded, while someone else countered, "They're still out there." Most damning was a woman's voice, unmistakably Lena's, issuing a direct command, "Cut it now." The words aligned perfectly with Marcus's claim of coercion, directly contradicting Lena's carefully constructed narrative of protective leadership. Later segments captured sounds that had haunted Rachel's fragmented memories, scratching at steel doors, muffled pleas from the barricaded wing, and most disturbing, 2 distinct gunshots fired hours after the initial confrontation. "The firearm matches Ortiz's missing sidearm," Bear noted, consulting inventory records, which neither Lena nor Marcus mentioned in their testimonies. As the recordings continued, investigators documented each voice, each sound, creating a timeline far different from any survivor's account. The evidence suggested multiple confrontations rather than a single chaotic night, with alliances shifting as conditions deteriorated. Forensic analysis brought additional revelations. Chemical testing confirmed multiple people had handled the generator wires, not just Marcus. Kerosene traces near Ortiz's body suggested deliberate arson attempts rather than accidental spills from emergency heating. Most troubling were partial fingerprints recovered from the station's medication cabinet. The secure unit had been forced open, with significant quantities of psychiatric medications missing from inventory. The prints matched Dr. Anika Jansen, one of the researchers supposedly barricaded in the East Wing. "The recordings transform everything," Bear told her team as they compiled findings. "The survivors' words have collapsed under the weight of mechanical memory." When confronted with the audio evidence, Dr. Lena Vargas' carefully maintained composure finally fractured. Her hands trembled slightly as the recordings played, her earlier confidence replaced by defensive justification. "You don't understand the pressure we were under," she insisted. Decisions had to be made quickly. Marcus Holt's reaction proved equally revealing. Rather than vindication at Lena's exposed deception, he showed increasing agitation as the timeline expanded. When investigators questioned him about the gunshots, he claimed no knowledge while displaying clear physiological signs of recognition. Rachel Niviak, upon hearing the recordings, experienced both distress and clarity. "The voices," she whispered. "Now you can hear them too." For the first time, she provided coherent details about the barricaded researchers. According to Rachel, the decision to separate the group came after concerning behavioral changes in several team members, including paranoia and aggression that escalated rapidly. "We thought they were dangerous," she explained, her voice steadying. "But we were wrong about who needed to be contained." The black box had stripped away deniability, forcing a fundamental reassessment of the case. The remaining question hung heavy over the investigation. Who, in those final days of Outpost Perseverance, had been chosen to die? As Bear compiled her updated report, one audio fragment captured the ultimate truth of what had happened at the remote station. Through static and distortion, Dr. Wei Chen's voice could be heard addressing someone unseen. "This isn't about the cold anymore. It's about what we found in the ice, and what..." With evidence from the black box recordings, recovered journals, and forensic analysis, investigators assembled a timeline of Outpost Perseverance's final days. The picture that emerged differed drastically from the survivors' sanitized accounts. The generator sabotage hadn't been a spontaneous act of rebellion or control, but a deliberate decision made by the group after the East Wing was already barricaded. Temperature logs showed the outpost had maintained partial power for nearly 12 hours after the supposed complete failure. "They intentionally accelerated the freeze," Bear observed, reviewing thermal data. "The question is why they wanted conditions to deteriorate so quickly." By January 26th, 3 days after the initial confrontation, only Lena, Marcus, and Rachel remained in the main section of the facility. The others were either locked behind steel doors or already missing. The station had become a frozen battlefield of competing survival strategies. Dr. Elena Morris, psychologist consulting on the case, helped contextualize the behavioral patterns. "What we're seeing is the collapse of social cohesion under extreme isolation," she explained, examining the evidence timeline. The group fractured along lines of trust that had been weakening for weeks before the crisis point. Food supplies had been depleted far earlier than reported. Inventory records indicated standard rations should have sustained the full team for another month. Instead, survivors resorted to consuming emergency dog food reserves stored for visiting research teams, melted snow for hydration, and even protein samples intended for experiments. The black box captured conversations revealing the depths of their desperation. "We can last another week if we stick to the plan," Lena's voice stated on January 28th, followed by Marcus responding, "They won't last 2 days in there without heat." Most disturbing were medical logs showing systematic distribution of sedatives to researchers before they were confined. Dr. Anika Jansen's journal described increasing paranoia among the team, with several members experiencing unexplained symptoms including insomnia, nosebleeds, and auditory hallucinations. "Something changed after they brought in the ice core samples," her final entry noted. "The headaches started, then the dreams, then the watching. Always watching." Evidence of the final confrontation appeared throughout the station. Blood spatter analysis indicated multiple violent encounters rather than a single chaotic night. Tool marks on interior doors showed desperate attempts to breach the barricades from both sides as alliances shifted. Rachel's fractured recollections gained credibility as evidence accumulated. Her insistence that they locked the wrong ones out aligned with security logs showing the barricaded researchers had attempted to implement quarantine protocols before communications failed. "The survivors didn't live through unity or superior planning," Bear noted in her case summary. "They survived through exclusion and increasingly brutal choices." The station's medical bay told the final chapter of this grim saga. Surgical tools had been arranged for a procedure never completed. Blood-stained bandages indicated emergency treatment attempted without proper equipment or expertise. A handwritten note in Dr. Wei Chen's distinctive script read simply, "Containment failed. Isolation protocol active." By the time rescue arrived, Lena, Marcus, and Rachel had endured 9 days of isolation after the others were gone. The black box captured their deteriorating relationships, accusations, threats, and finally, a fragile alliance born not of trust but mutual dependence. "I never wanted any of this," Marcus's voice whispered in one of the final recordings. "We should have left when we had the chance." Lena's response came through static. "It's too late now. No one would believe what happened here." Rachel's voice, clearer than in her later testimony, delivered the most haunting assessment. "We're alive, but we left the human part behind days ago." As investigators compiled their final report, the Outpost structural engineer provided one last disturbing detail. The barricades hadn't been constructed to keep people in the East Wing. The reinforcements faced outward, designed to keep something contained rather than excluded. Whatever had happened in those final hours remained locked in the survivors' fractured memories and the silent, frozen corridors of Outpost Perseverance. The Churchill Courthouse stood small against the vast Arctic landscape, its weathered facade bearing witness to countless northern stories. Inside, legal proceedings regarding Outpost Perseverance concluded with subdued formality rather than dramatic resolution. Prosecutors found themselves limited by evidence that suggested collective responsibility rather than individual culpability. After weeks of testimony and expert analysis, the case settled into an uncomfortable legal compromise. Marcus Holt received a suspended sentence for equipment sabotage, the only charge that could be definitively proven. His haunted expression as he left the courtroom suggested a punishment far beyond legal consequences already weighed upon him. Dr. Lena Varga faced no criminal charges despite her documented deception. The black box recordings proved her complicity in the station's collapse but fell short of establishing direct responsibility for any deaths. She resigned from the Arctic Research Institute and disappeared from scientific circles entirely. Rachel Niviak returned to her coastal community, where elders provided traditional healing alongside conventional therapy. Though her health improved, locals reported she never again ventured onto sea ice and jumped at the sound of doors closing. The families of the 6 missing researchers received financial settlements accompanied by formal apologies. These clinical gestures did little to fill the void left by loved ones whose bodies remained unrecovered, presumed buried beneath shifting pack ice that would never surrender its secrets. Arctic administrators officially classified Outpost Perseverance as a catastrophic system failure and sealed the remaining structure. Satellite imagery later confirmed winter storms had reclaimed the site entirely, erasing the physical evidence of human tragedy beneath pristine drifts. Dr. Elena Morris, reviewing the psychological aspects of the case, noted the most disturbing element wasn't what had been discovered but what remained unknown. "In crisis, humans create narratives to make sense of chaos," she observed. "What's notable here is how desperately each survivor constructed a story they could live with. Some questions persisted beyond official closure. The unidentified fingerprints found throughout the station never matched any known database. The missing researchers' final communications referenced discoveries in ice core samples that were never recovered. Medical anomalies documented in station logs defied conventional explanation. Constable Sarah Baer filed her final report with these lingering uncertainties carefully documented. Her closing assessment offered no comfort to those seeking clear resolution. In the end, the snow preserved no heroes, only 3 survivors, bound by silence. The truth of what happened at Perseverance may never be fully known. But in the white silence of the Arctic, survival was not a triumph, it was a sentence. The recording ends with the sound of wind over ice, nature's patient whisper erasing all evidence of human passage across the endless white. The small cafe in Reykjavik offered anonymity, its windows fogged against Iceland's persistent drizzle. Lena arrived first, choosing a corner table away from other patrons. She had aged visibly in just 1 year. Marcus entered hesitantly, scanning the room before approaching. His once lanky frame had filled out, but shadows remained beneath his eyes. Neither spoke as he settled across from her. "You look better," Lena finally offered, her voice softer than the commanding tone he remembered. The steam from her untouched coffee rose between them like a fragile barrier. "Therapy helps," Marcus replied, not meeting her gaze. His fingers traced the wooden table's grain, following patterns only he could see. "You're the last person I expected to call." They sat in weighted silence until the rain intensified, drumming against the windows. The familiar sound transported them both back to metal roofs and Arctic isolation. "I've been having the dreams again," Lena admitted, her composure finally cracking. "About what we found in that ice core. About what it did to us." Marcus nodded slowly, recognition flickering across his face. The microorganisms in the ancient ice. How they changed after thawing in the lab. "Wei was right about the neurological effects," Lena whispered, leaning forward. "The aggression, paranoia, the cognitive changes. It wasn't just isolation or cold." Their hands remained inches apart on the table, neither reaching across the divide. The unspoken question hung between them. How much had been their choices, and how much the influence of something ancient awakened from ice? "Do you think Rachel knows?" Marcus asked. "That what found us in the ice core samples was something that had been dormant for millennia?" Lena's gaze drifted to the window, to the world continuing beyond their shared nightmare. "The others understood before we did. That's why they tried to implement quarantine. And we locked them out," Marcus finished, his voice barely audible. "Thinking we were the sane ones." Two survivors bound by secrets too strange for courts or public record. The official investigation had never discovered the truth about the ancient pathogen affecting neural pathways, triggering primal fears and aggression. "They're still studying ice cores," Lena said finally. "New outposts, new teams, no warnings." Marcus met her eyes directly for the first time. "Then this isn't really over, is it?" As they left separately into the rain, their burden remained shared but undiminished. Some Arctic secrets were never meant to thaw.